Everyone, this is Kumar with Ingram Micro. Welcome to today's session on the CISSP modular training, security assessment and testing. So this is one of the domains of CISSP which we are going to cover today. And if you have any questions, please feel free to unmute yourself so that it is not a one-way session. Let's make it as interactive as possible. And also, if you have any questions which you'd like to post it on the chat, please feel free to do so. I will try to address everything I could. All right, let's start. So this will be today's agenda. And I hope everyone can hear me well and you're able to see the screen. If not, just unmute yourself, pitch in, and let me know. Yeah, thank you. This will be today's agenda. We will be talking a little bit about the objective of this session. And I will also introduce you to CISSP, a high level about CISSP as a certification. And we will also cover the topics in today's session. And the next thing will be the deep dive into the topics. And we will also look at an overview of Ingram Micro cybersecurity services portfolio. And we will cover the META region, but we, as Ingram Micro, we cover all over the globe when it comes to security, cybersecurity. So the objective or the expectations of this training, so that it is clear to everybody. It is more of an overview session. It's not a full-fledged training for the exam. We do have training programs for which are like full-fledged training programs, which covers over 5 days. This is more of an overview or a bird's eye view of the of this particular domain, which we are going to talk about today, which is security assessment and testing. So, introduction to the CISSP. I believe most of you know it, but if not, this is one of the most premier certifications out there in the market when it comes to security. And the best thing it is vendor agnostics. It covers almost everything when it comes to security. It's more of a breadth rather than a depth when it comes to security. So it touch bases on network security, asset management, identity and access management, risk management, security testing, security operations, everything as a whole. So it validates technical knowledge of a person and at a managerial level as well, so that a person who is CISSP will be able to understand, communicate clearly, design a proper secure solution for an organization, basically. And of course, to protect the overall security of the organization or improve the security posture of an organization. So the good thing about the exam now is the English format one was 6 hours before. It has come down to 3 hours. It's more of a computer-based testing now. And earlier it was at 250 questions. Now it is between 100 to 150 questions. It's kind of a how you perform. You get reduced questions. Some people pass it in 100 questions or so. And the passing grade for both the exams are 700 out of 1,000. So that is how they score it. The different criteria have different weightage. Different domains have different weightage. Some of the questions are more of a test questions, which which is not graded. So it's and to put it in another way. So people do think that CISSP is a tough exam. It is not a tough exam per se. It's kind of a confusing exam. It's more of choose the best option for that particular scenario, and because if you are in a different scenario, another option would work. So it's more of a choose the best option. So that is why people tend to feel or get misled thinking that it is a tough exam. It is really not a tough one. Rather, it is more of a confusing one, to say it. All right, this is the different weightage for CISSP. So these are the 8 domains of CISSP. So security and risk management is the first domain, which carries around 15%. That is one of the most important domain. So that is the reason why it carries 15%. So it talks about asset security, which is 10%, security architecture and engineering, which is 13%, communication and network security, which is again an important topic, which is 14%, identity and access management, 13%, security assessment and testing, the one which we are going to talk about today, covers 12%. And security operations covers 13%, and software development security covers the 10%. So in total, this gives you 100% of weightage when it comes to the exam part of it, different domains and their weightage. So these are the certification requirements. Actually speaking, anybody can write the CISSP exam, but to get certified, you can become an associate, but to get certified, there are certain criteria. One is you have to have 5 years of work experience, and you should have at least a 4-year college degree. And what happens with the 4-year college degree is you get 1 out of the 5 years of experience. You can remove one. You basically get a 4-year work experience is all that you need to get the certification. If not, you need 5 years of experience. And what happens is you can still become a you can still write the exam, pass the exam, but you will become an associate. That doesn't mean that you do not know you have passed the exam. And once you meet the requirements, you can apply for it and get the CISSP certification. So that's one of the things about CISSP. The other one is continuous professional credits. What you have to do is you need to keep building your stuff. That's one good thing about the exams. Even after the exams, every year you need to ensure you are learning, you are keeping in touch with technology, you are improving yourself. That is one of the things what you have to do in security or anything with when it comes to technology these days. So you need to keep improving yourself so that you do not stagnate and keep up with the curve. Yeah. So that is the CPE requirements that is after the certification. So every 3 years, there is a CPE requirement. Every year you need to pay an additional membership fee, as well as you need to complete certain amount of CPEs, which is 40 as a whole. Group A has 30 and Group B has 10, which comes to 40 for a year. So that's more related to the CISSP. Let's jump into list of topics. And before we get into the list of topics, I just remembered something. CISSP is a very good certification. The reason being is it is recognized as a master's degree in some parts of the world. Recently, UK announced that it is equivalent to that of a master's degree. So that's one good thing about a certificate. I have never heard of any other certificate which is said the same way. So, which is good. So in today's session, we are going to cover these 3 topics. And if you look at the third topic, it's kind of it deviates from what we are going to cover, but we have also included it due to the importance it poses. So the first one is going to be security assessment. The second one is going to be security testing. And the third one is going to be event logging, the importance of log management. So that is what we are going to cover today. So let's dive into the topic today. So first thing is we need to understand the difference between testing and then assessment. So why are we calling assessment, security assessment and testing? These are like contradictory statements. So the first thing we are going to talk about is assessment. So what is a security assessment? Security assessment is more about a thoughtful approach to security. It is to identify the current risk and future risks to an organization. It is not limited to a testing. Testing is more like scanning, doing penetration testing, vulnerability assessments. Security assessment is more of technology risk assessment, looking at all aspects of security of a system, from its development to operations. And usually, say, an assessment ends up as a report. It's more of a non-technical report. At layman language without any technical jargons, and the report will contain the risks identified as part of the assessment and its recommendations. So security assessment can be technology risk assessment, the audits we perform, the reviews we perform, the reports we look at to get more information about the organization's security posture. And whereas security testing is more of verifying the actual control that is in place. That is, if you have a firewall in place, I try to break the firewall. That is what it is all about. It is like penetrating into the environment. So that is what testing is. So that is a major difference between testing and assessment. Assessment is more of a comprehensive review to understand the risks or to an organization. As I said earlier, security test verifies whether a control is functioning properly or not. So this is what a list of things a security assessment and a training program would have. First thing is you need to have a policy in place in your organization so that you ensure security assessment is carried out from time to time. Methodology. You need to create a methodology for the assessment. So how we are going to perform, what we are going to do, how often we are going to do, it should all be covered in the methodology. And there are different testing methodologies available. For example, OSINT or OWASP, which are available in the market. Or so we can follow any of those methodology when it comes to security testing bit of it, penetration testing, for instance. Roles and responsibilities, you need to definitely, as part of the program, you need to assign the roles and responsibilities so that you can create a racing matrix where a person is accountable, all related parties are responsible. And security assessment or testing should not end up only at testing the part of it. It should also be carried out after the recommendations are implemented. Scope, you need to scope your testing. You don't have to test everything in an environment if the environment asset is not critical, because if you're going to bring in scope, for example, a testing environment into a scope of a production environment, it's going to be too much trouble for the organization. It will be extra expenditure for an organization. So a scope, testing scope is very much important. Project plan, of course, you need to have a plan to execute any project properly, and think of this program as a project. So whenever there is a testing which has to happen, you need to create a project plan so that everything is done, everyone is informed about the testing, and it is carried out without any downtime to the organization. And execution of the testing, that is the main thing. All right, so we execute it based on the project plan. So you carry out testing and you make people informed. You have the backup guys ready if something happens, goes wrong, because usually testing, when it comes to security testing in itself, it is intrusive to an extent. So you need to ensure if something goes down, if availability is tampered, or we need to fix it. And even before the testing, if possible, you need to make sure you have a proper backup done so that you can recover from the backup, just in case. And the data of the testing, or the report of the testing, or whatever is being collected during the testing phase, should be handled in a careful manner, because you are going to find vulnerabilities of an organization. And these vulnerabilities can expose the organization to a greater extent. It creates a bigger threat vector for an organization. So these reports are very important, confidential. You need to ensure it is whatever the data which is collected as part of the process, wherever it is stored, transmitted, or whenever you destroy it, you follow CIA principles, as in confidentiality, integrity. The main thing is the confidentiality of it. Integrity of the report is very much important, so that we can, the recommendations, whatever we are going to tell them, they can address it properly. And of course, it should be available for the right people. So we need to ensure this is, again, whatever the test data which we are going to collect as part of the testing program and assessment is treated as confidential as a production data. Analysis is definitely important to find out the actual problems for your organization before a report is generated. So these are the components of a security assessment and a testing program in general. So now we are going to talk about security assessment. So as I mentioned earlier, security assessment are more comprehensive reviews, which covers end to end. When it comes to an application, it'll talk about infrastructure, it will talk about interfaces, it will talk about how an identity and access management is built into the system. It's going to talk about all 8 domains. So that is more of a comprehensive approach to security. So that is why an organization, even if they do security testing, it is still required to perform a security assessment. Security assessment will also is similar to security audits, or security audits are also part of security assessment. You can also think of it that way. So do not confuse security testing, which is like more of testing the functionality of the security controls that are in place, with security assessment, because security assessment is more of a thoughtful approach rather than a functional approach. So basically, when we talk about identify vulnerabilities on the third point, we are talking here about not only the vulnerabilities at a software level. It can be an administrative vulnerability. It can be anything, which can be a network related vulnerability or an infrastructure related vulnerability. So whatever we are talking, when we say vulnerability here, we are not only talking about software vulnerabilities, we are talking about weakness in general for the tested environment, not only the application. So we will be performing a proper risk assessment as part of security assessment to understand current and the future risks for an organization. Sometimes security assessment will include penetration testing, but usually it goes beyond the automated scans. So it is not limited only to that. It goes beyond one step further, or rather than more steps further, not one step further. More steps further beyond your usual automated scanning or penetration tests. So it's more like reviewing an environment and to identify its current and future risks, and then creating a value proposition to secure certain risks by rating the risks and also adding them to risk register. In the end, security assessments usually provide an assessment report so that senior management can understand the overall security posture of the organization. And they can also understand the recommendations so that they can prioritize the recommendations, so that they can have a project plan in place to remediate the risks, thereby improve the security of an organization. So this is basically an overview of security assessment. So one of the security assessment activity is administrative assessment. So it is more like interviewing people. It is like finding out whether they are following policies which are in the organization. For example, acceptable use policy, reviewing certain things. And we will also look at as part of this administrative assessment, if a company does not even have a ISMS, Information Security Management System policy, we'll go highlight that, okay, you are lagging here. You don't even have a policy or a procedure to even secure your environment. So this is what administrative assessment is all about. And in the end, we will, after the interviews, after understanding what is happening, whether they have the right set of things to secure their environment, to have a proper program in place, we will also record the observations and submit the observations, basically. The next thing we are going to talk about is technical assessment. So the previous one is more of interviews and things like that. Technical assessment is more of reviewing the configurations. For example, whether logging is in place, whether you have a password policy in place on an actual system. So you will have a password policy. You need to go and check whether the password policy is configured in all the systems, whether you have, for example, login banners. If your company requires a login banner requirement, you need to go check whether it has one, or whether you have default password policies. You check all those things as part of the technical assessments. And you will also check whether a principle of least privilege is followed, how we are managing, what happens when it comes to identity and access management, whether a user is being removed or disabled after a certain amount of time after the person left the organization. We will look at all those aspects as part of the technical assessments. So some of them are listed here. So you check the firewall configuration on each system. You check the reports for antivirus updates and patch levels of all the systems. And you get a report and understand potential vulnerabilities found on each systems. Um, Default configurations. These are one of the key things which should be there, which we have to avoid. Um, and as I said earlier, we will also talk about unused user accounts or user accounts which are no longer valid or expired or they haven't been used for a very long time. And also whether the privileges, whether a recertification program happens in a company or not. We look at all those aspects. So that is what this one is all about. Um, to put it in, these are some of the examples of it. So these are some of the things which we do as part of technical assessment. So I believe you get the gist of it. So yeah, and the as part of the assessment, so we can also call our assessment usually as an internal assessment. So, but then there is also something called an external ones. So these are called audits, right? So internal and external audits.
Hello.
Hello, hi, yes.
Hi, my name is Anas. Sorry, I just have a quick question about the previous slide. Um, yeah, so this technical assessment, is it the security testing, the one that we talked about in the previous slides?
No, no. So this is not security testing. So as I said earlier, security testing is more about checking the functionality. So for example,
Okay.
that's a very good question actually, Anish. Thank you for asking. Yeah. So by the way, so technical assessment, the difference between testing and an assessment is, okay, let's say there is a password policy. As per your ISMS policy
Mm-hmm.
of an organization, you need to have a password policy of, for example, 10 characters and complexity should be enabled.
Okay.
Security assessment is like getting into a system, for example, into a domain controller, looking at the GPO to see you have configured, you have set the password policy as 10 and the complexity requirements and then history values
Okay.
required. But at testing, which will going to come in the future, is to ensure whether, say, even after setting the GPO, if the GPO is not applied properly on systems, it's not going to reflect the password policy.
I see.
So security assessment is more like verifying you have done what you're supposed to do. Testing is verifying the functionality, whether the system actually accepts proper password or whether it also accepts invalid password, which it should not even accept. So that is security testing. This is security assessment.
Okay. Okay.
That
Perfect.
is the
Perfect.
difference.
Thank you.
So that
Thank you,
is the
Kumar.
reason. Yeah, that is the reason. Also, it says configuration of for instance, checking your firewall configuration, right? So
Yeah.
checking your firewall configuration doesn't mean that your firewall is going to work as it is supposed to. There might be some other vulnerability which will break the firewall as well. So finding out the functional part of it is testing. Finding out what is supposed to be there is assessment. Yeah,
Okay. Okay. Perfect. Thank you, Kumar.
no problem. Thank you. Any other questions, anyone? Feel free to jump in. I'm more than happy to answer. And thank you, Anish, for the question. So, as I was still saying earlier, internal and external audits. So these are nothing but assessment. There is not much of difference. Think of internal audits as more of an assessment. External audit is what an external regulatory body will accept. An internal audit is more of a self-assessment, which we do on ourselves, so that we prepare for an external audit, so that we do not delay an external audit. So basically, an audit or an assessment is usually performed to know the current security posture of an organization. It will be verifying the policies, verifying the baselines. It will be also linked to verifying your vulnerability reports, patch management environment, everything. So these are like this is done to understand the current security posture. And the same thing will also be done by a third party when it comes to regulatory requirement. If you want to get PCI DSS certified, you need to go to a external auditor. You need to get them in so that they will audit your environment and you can get a PCI DSS certification. Same thing with ISOs. Yeah. So internal audits are usually done by audit teams or risk teams in an organization. So they review everything. They review the processes, they review the log, they review the transactions, they review everything in a system to understand whether it is following company's information security policy or not. And another key thing is an internal audit function should not report to an IT team. Uh, it'll create a conflict of interest. Usually, the assessment or the auditors they report directly to C-level executives or top management or CISSP, for example. They report to them so that nobody come and intervene or interfere in their process, and they should be given absolute freedom so that they can find a report even before we get into an external auditors. External auditors are even beyond that, right? So that is why we have an internal auditing team or an assessment team in every organization, in every bigger organizations, of course. In smaller organizations, an individual will double as a security information security officer will also double as an assessor. External, as I said earlier, external assessment or it is a requirement, right? So if you want to abide by some certain regulatory standards, you need to have an external auditor perform an audit of an organization and provide a report so that people can so that they can the federal organizations or a regulatory authority will know your status and external audit will know your status and provide your certification. And also during a breach or something, this is going to prove you useful to reduce your fines or regulatory repercussions. So this is one of the key things. And the main thing is the idea is same. So when I said internal auditors should not report to an IT department, it's the same thing. External auditors come in because internal teams is still within the company, right? So they need an external party, a third party who comes in and does it, who and so that no one else have control on the third party. That is the main reason for external audits. So these are some of the audit best practices. As I said earlier, any program you should have a proper plan. So you should have a overall plan for the entire auditing process. And you should collect the data. You should not wait and collect data on that day. Rather than that, collect data in advance before you get into on-site to save time. The ones which you can collect basically, and the ones you can start working on. So as part of the audit or as part of your plan, you should definitely speak to the data handlers and data owners because um, interview gives you more insight. So you should not only believe at what was given to you. You need to go speak to different people so that you can understand what is happening. And if there is any discrepancy, you can also highlight that. And you need to perform tests as part of audits. So sometimes security testing would also be needed, some automated or manual testing to find out, for example, a vulnerability scan is more of a security testing. We can also do that to get a report so that you know the vulnerable systems in your organization and whether any of the critical systems are part of the vulnerable systems and what is happening when it comes to patch management, whether they are following a cycle or not. So all those things can also be gathered. So as I said earlier, when it comes to testing, you are only going to test certain part of it. When it comes to assessment, you are going to gather all information to get a comprehensive report on the security posture of an organization. So you can also analyze the on-site information off-site, but this is where we are going to I'm going to remind you of the thing which I said earlier. You need to ensure the data which is collected as part of this is going to be treated securely. If it is going to reach an organization outside yours, you need to find ways to secure that data so that it cannot be mishandled by anyone else. Because if somebody knows the weakness, we are actually giving that report is like giving somebody a candy, giving a kid a candy. It's like giving a hacker about our own vulnerabilities. So it'll become a recon process. It'll also make the recon process easier. So treat that information if it is going to move to offsite or if somebody is going to analyze it offsite. So treat that information very secure. Find ways not to transfer that information. Um, And when it comes to assessment, so it depends on the type of assessment. You can do a regular reports if it is a weekly report to know about the risk registers and things like that within the organization. So you can create a weekly report to find out how many risks are pending, how many risks are added as part of the week, or monthly or a quarterly basis. You can do it that way. But you need to ensure you have regular reports. You are following it up and ensure if in a risk register, if you're going to say, I only need this risk, if the risk is accepted only for 6 months, after 6 months, it is supposed to be closed or it should be readdressed to see what is the status of it. Are we planning to fix it? Why we have not fixed it? So we need to also understand the root cause of it. So that if we have to extend that risk or whether it is okay to extend the risk. A risk which is low today can become high tomorrow. So that is very much important to review the risk register as well. So always have a management team review the draft, because if you might have missed certain things, if they review the draft, they can also clarify it before you finalize a report. Else it becomes a tedious process. Once you finalize a report, it is like signing a check, and you made a spelling mistake, you fix it, and then you need to do another signing. It becomes an even more tedious process than that, actually speaking. And always, whenever there is a report, do not be the naysayer of things, right? So always provide recommendations for fixing it. So if you're not going to provide a recommendation to fix it, there is no point in telling them there is a risk. So always provide recommendations. That's one of the best practice when it comes to audit or an assessment for fixing an outstanding issues. And you can also say how the severity level, so that they will also address which ones for, they will also know which ones to address first and which one they can tackle later, later basically. Now we are going to come to security testing. So the so what let me jump in and ask a question here. If anybody's interested, please feel free to jump in and answer, or you can even send a message on chat. So what are the different type of security testing you're aware of? Anybody? I'll give it a minute or two. And also check the chat. All right. Okay. Anyway, we'll cover it in the topic. One of the security testing is vulnerability assessment. Vulnerability assessment is here we are going to talk about more about software vulnerability assessment. So try to do it in periodic fashion. You need to ensure you deploy new systems. Whenever you deploy a new system, you need to perform a vulnerability assessment. It should be a periodic one. It should not be that I did it once and I'm safe. No, it does not work like that. We have something in Microsoft called Patch Tuesday, which means that every Patch Tuesday they are going to release patches. So we need to find out whether there is new vulnerabilities in the environment, and the vulnerability is not limited only at an OS level. It is also, you should also check at the application level. So it should be regular intervals. Whenever a new vulnerability is in the open, try to run a vulnerability scan. Vulnerability scans are less intrusive than a penetration testing, and you can cover most systems within a limited time. And if there is a security breach,
Hello, Kumar. I believe that you have pressed the mute button.
thank you for jumping in. I was speaking all this time. Thank
Yeah.
you. So,
I believe that you've done it again. I'm sorry to.
Am, am I still on mute?
Yeah, yeah, you're still on mute.
I hope I'm audible now.
Yeah, you're audible. Yeah.
I don't know what's happening. I unmuted it. Okay, crazy. Anyways, thank you for that. Yeah, all right. So vulnerability assessment. So one of the thing about security testing is vulnerability assessment is more of the basic kind of security testing. So you need to identify vulnerabilities in the software in your environment. It is not limited only to the OS. It is you need to do vulnerability assessments for your applications as well. So you need to do it on all your assets, basically. And so if you look at vulnerability assessment, you're going to collect information, store the information securely. You're going to organize it as in you need to organize it against the baseline of you need to first organize so that you can compare it in the next state against a baseline when it comes to your organization. So your organization will have a different criticality level for certain assets. The other organization is going to have a criticality set of the certain assets, and you need to report it. The reason being is if you do not classify it, you will end up addressing, uh, you will end up not addressing the critical systems on time, actually speaking. So what will happen is if you have 10 critical vulnerabilities and out of your 100 systems, only if 10 are critical systems, you need to first address those critical systems. But the remaining systems, some systems might even be test systems. They are not even part of it. So rather than addressing on all the systems, you need to start concentrating on the critical systems so that you can address those 10 against 10. So which is like you're addressing 100 vulnerabilities. If you're going to address it on all 100 systems, it's going to be like 1,000. You should do it, but when it comes to prioritization, this is what you do as part of analysis. A vulnerability is a vulnerability. As part of collected data, when you organize it, you know that you have vulnerability in an environment. And when, as part of analysis, you compare it, identify which ones you can, which ones you need to address first, rate the vulnerabilities as per your organization's threat model, and then report it so that the teams can start working on it. So usually you perform a VA, vulnerability assessment or vulnerability scanning, uh, when you first deploy any new system. So you need to ensure whenever you are deploying a new system, at least at that point, it should not have any vulnerabilities. So over time, it is going to definitely have some because there will be new vulnerabilities found. We have something called Patch Tuesday, right, with Microsoft. So which means that every Patch Tuesday they are releasing bulk of vulnerabilities or patches for vulnerabilities, and it should be done at regular intervals. It is not a one-time thing. It is not a first deploy thing. It should definitely be done on regular intervals. You should have a periodic, you should do it in periodic basis so that any new vulnerability which we would have missed, we will be able to identify it and address it. So whenever something new is identified in the open, you need to also run a scan again, because if it is a critical vulnerability, it is better to know which systems you have them and you can immediately start addressing it. As after a security breach, you need to do many things, but one of the things when it comes to a security breach is vulnerability assessment. You start with the vulnerability scans to identify vulnerabilities, to know about your vulnerable environment, but we have to do a lot more after a security breach. And again, all the vulnerability scans has to be documented. There are also regulatory requirements and also standard requirements, organization standard requirements, wherein you document the vulnerability scan reports so that you maintain it, and you can also prove it as evidence when if somebody comes and says, do you do vulnerability scans? So this is more of vulnerability assessment. Vulnerability assessment usually targets OS and software. So please do not limit only to the OS part of it. Always target an application layer as well. Penetration testing. So the difference between vulnerability assessment, one of the main differences, this is more intrusive. It is like you're going to hack into the system. As I said earlier, your OS might not be vulnerable, but if your application is vulnerable, or your application might not be vulnerable if there is a misconfiguration on an application, right? we can also use that misconfiguration to get into the application. So that is a vulnerable, that is a weakness. That is not a software weakness, it's a software configuration, but it's more of a misconfiguration weakness. So that is one of the things which we will try to figure out or find during a penetration testing. So it's more than a vulnerability assessment, and it is more intrusive. So basically what happens with penetration testing is you are actually going to simulate an attack on the system. So which means that you are going to do what a hacker is going to do. So, but it is more like an ethical hacking. So you identify whether there is a threat exists, you actively test and bypass it, and exploit vulnerabilities if they are. So that to prove it is more of a proof point wherein you go and prove them that your system is not only vulnerable, it is easy to exploit. And as I said earlier, vulnerability assessment is more common. Every company can go for vulnerability scanners. Everybody would have heard of Qualys. Everybody would have heard of Nessus, Rapid7. Anybody? So when compared to vulnerability assessment, penetration testing is less common. People are not aware of the importance of penetration testing. Some organizations, some small organizations, are not aware of it. Importance of data protection. Recently, even in Dubai, we have this new data privacy regulations now. There is an act, and organizations are given 3 months starting July 30th, starting this month, 3 months to comply with the regulatory requirements. So one of the requirement would be to protect their data, and without doing a proper penetration testing, you might not be able to know the actual vulnerability that can be exploited in the system. This vulnerability can be related to a misconfiguration as well. So, and this is more of an objective based measurement, and it'll give you a holistic understanding of the vulnerability rather than an application level vulnerability. So this will actually follow a real attacker's methodology. So be prepared for any downtime. So always we need to, as part of a project plan, I explained it earlier. So there will, when penetration testing is done, it is an intrusive test, and it can bring down your server. You need to have the guys ready to bring it up again, so that it is available and tested properly. And always back up before a penetration testing where possible. So the only difference between the penetration testing and the real attack is consensus. So basically, we know the intent of the testing. So the organization knows the intent. The organization asks people to do it for them. Wherein real attack is more like organization is not even aware of something is happening, and they don't even know something has happened on certain cases. After a very long time, they come to realize it, and they get into a lot of repercussions. So, and penetration testing is usually done after obtaining an explicit approval or a test authorization letter, for instance, so that we can test and a proper scope is defined, and we stay in our boundaries. When something goes wrong, even the penetration tester is going to report an incident. And organizations will be able to stop before an actual attack or before any damage happens to their environment. So that is the key difference between a pen test and a real attack. Everything else is the same. And as I said earlier, report should always, any report, whenever we find a weakness, it should always have a recommendation. And when it comes to penetration testing, it should also include steps undertaken. So what are the steps they have did during the course of the penetration testing? So they should highlight that, so that we will be able to identify what are the things they have done. If they have missed something, we can also ask them to do that. So this is usually the penetration testing process. It's more like an ethical hacking process. Yeah. So we do a recon to find any resource. It can be a passive or an active recon. The next thing is actual scanning to identify vulnerability. And the third one is, once you find a vulnerability, you try to exploit it. And once the exploit is done, you try to maintain access so that you can collect information so that you can submit it as evidence as part of the report. Report is your reporting. So these are the 5 key process when it comes to ethical hacking or penetration testing. Yeah. So in general, whenever a penetration testing is performed, there are three main approaches. One is black box testing. It means nothing but nobody knows anything about the environment. The penetration tester does not know anything about the environment. So he has to figure everything out. So that is what a black box testing. Usually a company, when they do a penetration testing, they go for a gray box or a white box because they wanted to identify, because only when you perform an authenticated or informed penetration testing, right, you can find more vulnerabilities in your environment and you can fix more problems. So black box is more like what an ethical hacker would do. It is more of a higher level. It takes less time than a white box and a gray box. And in most cases, success rate is not that much. But when it comes to white box and gray box, success rate is higher. White box, you provide detailed information about the target. You give them everything, and you don't have to do many of the recon steps. For example, finding out the IP address or finding out who is responsible doing a social engineering. Many things you can avoid when it comes to a white box. Gray box is more of a white box, but also less of a black box. As in, it is a combination of both. You uh, you don't give them all the details. You don't give the penetration tester all the details. He has to collect some details, and you also provide him certain details. For instance, you will give a username and password, um, a normal username and password to log into an application. He has to do an attack to escalate it and find more details about the application in itself or the database which is running in the background and things like that. So that is more of a gray box testing. So these are the three approaches when it comes to penetration testing in general. Okay. So we spoke of vulnerability assessments or vulnerability testing. The second thing we spoke of penetration testing. The third one we are going to talk about, another important thing, is software reviews. The importance of software reviews. This is one of the things you have to do to protect yourself at a code level, because at a code level wherein the software might be working at an application level, but there is a chance that at a code layer, for example, there was once in the past wherein we had this heartbleed vulnerability which was caused by OpenSSH, which is being used. At the code level, there are chances that you might also use some open source softwares which might be vulnerable. So those things can be overlooked. So when you do a code review, you try to find out what is being used as part of the application built, and you try to find the problems and fix it. So that is what you do as part of code reviews. So usually code review done by a peer developer or a team lead or a third-party organization or a security team. Um, if you have heard of IBM AppScan, which is now sold, uh, these are some of the tools which are also used to run a code review. It's not only at a functional level when it comes to application functionality, it is also at the security side of things. So security testing should also be included as part of code review. So basically, it's more like a third-party guy. So it's not the same person who has developed reviews the code. It's another person who reviews the code. So that's what it means. And there are two types of testing when it comes to software. One is called static testing. The other one is called dynamic testing. Static testing is more like code reviews or compiled application review. Without you will not be actually checking the execution state. So during execution, it can call some other libraries. You might not be looking at those things. That is what a dynamic testing would do. So you should not limit yourself with static testing. You should also perform dynamic testing where possible, so that you know about the vulnerabilities even in a runtime environment rather than at a code level. So that is what a dynamic testing does when compared with static testing. So these are some of the things what we do as part of software testing. So you do a unit test, as in you find out it's more of a yes or no. You provide some input. You see whether this is more of a basic test. And one of the key things you need to look at is integration tests. So you should test all the components that are integrated in the system. as I said earlier, if you are going to integrate an open source application or any other application, if that application's vulnerability is going to affect your system, you need to find ways to fix that as well. Interface test. Interface test is more about how do you interface two systems and applications, right? So when you open the interface and how do you interconnect, so that is what it is going to help as part of finding out the different interfaces available. Functional test is more about performance testing. So it is going to talk about availability part of security. So if you have all the controls, confidentiality and integrity in place, and if the system is not capable of handling loads, which it is supposed to do, it introduces risks to the organization, to the business. So as part of functional test, you get that information, you can add that information into your risk assessments and things like that if a functional test is not performed. System test is testing the complete system, or one of the things you do as part of system test is doing a penetration test can also do a system test part of it. User acceptance test is more of an experience-based test. So whether what is the delay a user faces or how fast it is. That is one of the tests, one of the software tests which we usually do. So regression test is like removing some of the components and find out whether it still works or not. For instance, instead of you disable an external authentication mechanism and then you try to log into the server to know whether it works or not. If it bypasses the authentication mechanism, you know that there is a flaw in the system. So that's basically what it is. First test is giving input. First or misuse test in the end is more like giving inputs to the system which it should not even accept. Wherein if it accepts it, it means that it is not doing an input validation. For instance, if you have a input box and you're sending a SQL query instead of alphanumeric characters, it should not accept it. Or when it accepts it, it should validate and convert it into text rather than think of it as a query, so that you can prevent a SQL injection attack. So that is what misuse or first test is all about. So these are some of the software tests which you can perform from a security perspective to protect your organization. So these are some of the guidelines when it comes to security control testing. So you need to ensure you train your developers so that they can build security as part of their product itself, as part of the development. And you should, if you're going to, if you're not doing any code reviews for the software which you developed in-house, you should start integrating it, because it's more and more becoming critical to understand the risks of an inbuilt software. And as I said earlier, if you're going to use open source, you need to know about which open source you are talking about. If you're going to use another application to get some information, you should ensure that application's vulnerability should not affect. So you need to be aware of common software vulnerabilities. And you need to adopt the testing technique which is needed for your organization. You should not just blindly do something what other organization does. Adapt based on your environment, the technology being used. For example, if you're going to run a testing which should be done on a SQL database and you're using Oracle database, that does not make any sense, for example. You need to also consider different types of testing, for instance, static and dynamic testing, which we spoke of, or penetration testing for out of the box systems. Yeah. So, sorry. And a plan is very much important. As I said earlier, I need to ensure a proper test case is there, and you define the requirements, and all those requirements are addressed as part of the test cases. User interface testing is very much important to know whether you are clicking on something and it is doing everything securely, because you can visit a HTTPS site, but not the entire site might be a HTTPS. Some of the components or some of the frames would be on HTTP. So you need to ensure all the data which is supplied goes on a secure channel. So that is something we need to perform as part of user interface testing. And as part of input validation and similar techniques. These are to address many flaws which are in the system. As I said earlier, one of the flaws is SQL injection. It can also address cross-site scripting, many things. And always create a baseline for testing. And whenever you're getting a software from a third party uh, or a COTS product, for instance, commercially off the shelf product, you need to ensure you do proper assessment before you buy the product, and when as and when you bought the product, you need to ensure all patches are up to date for those products. And if you're going to be the reason why we are talking about overly verbose is during the testing, if you want to find out something, it is okay, but do not give everything when it comes to error messages to an attacker so that they know more about your system. So whenever you are going to run tests, do not run it directly on production system, or at least for the softwares which you have developed, run it on your test beds so that you do not affect the production systems. Yep, that's more of testing from a assessment and a testing perspective of today's topic. Event logging. The reason why I included this is one of the main things when it comes to security of a environment. You should always, or your system should have event logging capabilities. So event logging should have detailed information about any event. So we will also see in the next slide what are the common things which you should have as part of event logging. So event log is often used to perform troubleshooting. When it comes to troubleshooting, and event logs are usually used for performance troubleshooting. No, it is not only the case. It should also be used for security controls. So if you have SIEM in your environment, you can bring in all the security events to the system. It can capture, it can analyze the data and report any security incidents. Wherein you cannot, if you have 10 network devices, you cannot go and find out events on 10 network devices at the same time. SIEM is a tool which is there for you to collect information, analyze it, and based on the triggers, it can report any security threats to the organization. And you need to ensure all your systems are configured and connected to a centralized repository so that every security event in the organization is monitored. These are some of the commonly logged activities. So one is authentication requests. You need to log both successful and unsuccessful authentication events. It's not enough only to log in unsuccessful events. Even though successful events will create a havoc, but then it is always better to understand, because when a breach happens, you need to understand which user account is used to log into the system successfully. Whenever a new group is created, or a group is created, because at group levels we assign roles, group membership changes, user privilege level changes, resource access, whoever has accessed it, opened, changed, deleted information. So number of transactions done by a service, whenever a application or a service or a server shuts down or restarts, and whenever there is a component error or failure, you need to log those information. And the last but not least is whenever there is a policy change in the system, you need to ensure it is being logged, more if possible the before and after state of it, so that you can compare. You know what is changed and you can remediate as soon as possible. And along with this, you should always have a proper timestamp. It should be connected to a central time server, and IP address information should be logged in. Username information is already logged in as part of this details. So these are some of the commonly logged activities which you have to ensure it is there as part of your event logging practices or data collection, data logging practices. Yeah. So that is more or less it for today's session. Now we are going to talk. I'm going to take a couple of minutes to talk about Ingram Micro Cybersecurity Services portfolio so that you are aware of it. So as part of our portfolio, we have 4 tools with us to help organizations assist with their problems or security concerns. We do something called a discovery report, wherein we try to look at things from an attacker's perspective, even before connecting to your organization. We try all possibilities to find out the information which is available in the open, and pass it on to you to know about your security posture, what an attacker can get from your organization. And we also have a virtual lab environment which can be used to do POCs without actually bringing in a server or doing any changes to your environment. So we have virtual lab with all of our security devices in our security portfolio. So which can we can integrate between things. So that's a purpose of the virtual lab. Cybergram is more of a security posture assessment report which we have in place. It is an in-house developed report tool, wherein it depends on the responses. It has 28 questions basically, and it is based on all frameworks like NIST and other PCI DSS and other frameworks which are available to understand the security posture of the organization. It's more or less like an question answer thing, wherein based on the answers which you give, you get a report of the security posture of the organization. And we do multi-vendor architecture, wherein we believe in a holistic approach to security. So if you have a requirement, we address it. We try to cover all bases rather than addressing. If you have a security issue, we do not only do go and say, okay, put antivirus on your system. No, we do not do that. We look at it at a holistic perspective. We address all vulnerable points so that your security posture of their organization is improved as a whole. So this is our holistic service portfolio. We understand the three pillars of any organization. One is people, process, and technology. So we cover all bases. So for people, we have cybersecurity trainings. For process, we do technical assessment, consultancy services, security testing as part of our managed security services. And when it comes to the technology part of it, these are our vendor list in the META region, Middle East, Turkey, and Africa region. So we do cover a lot more vendors in other regions as well. So these are the list for the META region. So, and if you have any questions, please feel free to ask me. Yeah. And thank you for joining.
Thank you so much, Kumar. I just have one quick question. It's about one of the previous slides that it's one of the first slides actually. It was when talking about becoming a CISSP associate. So you mentioned that you can actually become a CISSP certified, but if you don't have 5 years of work experience in two different domains, you will only be CISSP CISP associate. So let's say I am currently now CISSP associate and I finished my 5 years. Should I like contact ISC to tell them that
Yes.
I need to I need to get the pro one, or should I just repass the exam?
No, you don't have to pass the exam again. You need to
Okay.
maintain your credentials. Yeah. So what you do is once it is done, right? So you
Mm-hmm.
are an associate as soon as you pass the exam. So let's say CISSP exam, you pass the exam, you're not
Mm-hmm.
certified, you become an
Okay.
associate. And
Okay.
then you usually even if you satisfy all the requirements, you need to send the details to CISSP so that they will award you the certification. Until
Okay.
then, you are an associate because you passed the exam.
Okay.
And so the same thing applies. So as soon as you pass the exam, you have 6 years to provide them the required information to satisfy the requirements so that you get certified. And if you satisfy the requirements, pass the information on to them and they will certify you.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you so much, Kumar.
No problem at all. Any, I'm more than happy to answer any other questions. Yeah. And I believe we are a little past for session time, 6 minutes past. So I'm leaving the floor open. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. If not, have a very nice day and
Have a
rest.
very nice day, Kumar. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you guys. See you.
Yeah. Cheers. Thank
Bye.
you, everyone. Bye bye.